What's going on? Thank you so much for tuning into the Failed Podcasts. On this podcast, we really don't care if we fail. We're just going to keep going. We're going to keep improving. And in the same way, we hope that you're doing the same thing in your life. And we hope that you've enjoyed every episode up to now. We hope that we're bringing you these, stories and insights from people's journey that can make you say, you know what? I have a chance, because the main thing is that we don't want people to quit. And on today's episode, we have a dancer. What would you call it? A ballet, contemporary? How would you summarize what you do?
I always use the word dancer because I am from the classical ballet world, but these days you don't just do classical ballet, you do everything contemporary ballet and also modern and also sometimes jazz and also sometimes hip hop, like maybe not in the company, but I do a lot of different styles.
The voice that you're hearing is Alexandra. She has been so nice to come on the Failed Podcast. Me and my daughter and my wife went to the Modern Museum in Fort Worth a few weeks back, and she put on a show. Or how would you refer to it? A recital, a show?
I would say show or performance.
A performance, and it was great. Inside Voices, and you choreographed it. It was 2 days, and we went, and my daughter just loved it. And so I said I would love to have her on the podcast. I feel like dance doesn't come easy. It comes with a lot of challenges. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to explore some of the challenges that you've had to get where you are. But before we continue, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me your social media. Tell me your handle, how people can follow you. That way they can see who we're talking to on today's episode. But I will also be adding it on the description below.
Yeah. My Instagram is at Farbie, Farbie. And then I also have a website for my work, which is www.alexandrafarber.com. I would say those are the main ways you can find me and what I'm working on.
Tell me where a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, when you started loving dance, and then kind of walk me through a little bit of your journey, but from the dance perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I grew up in Washington, D.C., so East Coast gal, and that's where I went to school and received all my training. My school, Maryland Youth Ballet, was a huge part of growing up, and they're honestly one of the best dance schools, I would say, in the country. They're just fantastic, and they have a lot of good principles and like ideas, like as far as some of the things I think we'll get into today. But and I continued. I started dance at 3.
Wow.
My mom just put me and my sister in like little kids classes, and every year she was like, "Do you want to sign back up again?" And I was like, "Yeah." And in a way, like that's sort of just been how it's been since I was 3.
So a lot of people start off and they start off in dance, and it's because of their parents, and then there comes a point where it's their own decision and it becomes their passion. When did that happen for you?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say actually. I think my parents. I love my parents, and they're such a huge support. Like, I would not be where I am without them, obviously.
Shout out to parents.
Shout out to parents. Because from a young age, my mom let me be really autonomous about it. She was like, "Do you want to sign up again?" And my sister pretty quickly was like, "No." But apparently she didn't like tights.
Yeah.
But I was, as far as long as I can remember, it was sort of my decision. So every year I was just like, yes, I want to sign up for this again.
Well, okay, so the show that we saw at the Modern, okay, it was called Inside Voices. Let's jump into that from a few perspectives. I want to know what it takes to put something like that together, because it was you. How many people were involved? Was it 8?
Yeah, it's 8 dancers.
8 dancers.
And myself as a choreographer.
And it was like, from what I can recall, is about 30 minutes long or something. It was pretty long.
Yeah.
And it was pretty intense. And there was a storyline, and you were telling a story of adolescence and growing up, and it was very impactful. And it was a beautiful setting.
Thank you.
Tell me what it took to create that, right? To get people to believe in you, and then the journey leading up to it.
Yeah. I mean, my journey as a choreographer is a whole different thing. When I was younger, I loved choreographing
Yeah.
all the time. Like I would do it with my friends in my basement. We would put on little shows like here and there. Like we did one at an old folks home one time. It was really fun. I was like 10 years old. As an adult, though, and in my professional career as a
Yeah.
ballet dancer, it kind of fell to the back
Mm.
burner. And I mean, we can get into it later, but like there's not very much representation of female choreographers,
Got it.
especially in the ballet world.
Yeah.
Outside of the ballet world, it's a little bit better, but
Mm.
especially in the ballet world, it's really challenging. So my work with the modern kind of came out of me trying to find an opportunity for my work.
Yeah.
It was hard to find anything else that had space or wanted to take me on. And I made a connection with the modern. And so my first work there was called The Way We Change, and we performed
Oh,
that
okay.
in September of 2021.
Nice.
And so Inside Voices was my second work at the Modern to be performed.
Yeah.
A lot of growth along the way. I'm
Yeah.
glad that I had The Way We Changed first in September because you just learn so much from your first time to your second
I
time.
agree.
Also, The Way We Changed was only 4 dancers, so
Ah.
it was half the size of Inside Voices, about the same length of piece, but
Yeah.
yeah, like especially in a work like this, like I don't have a dance company. Like these are
Yeah.
the dancers who I work with
Hmm.
at my company and Texas Ballet Theater. That's where we all dance. But most people don't know this that when you're a ballet dancer, first of all, it's a full time job. Not everybody knows that, so it is a 9 to 5.
Yeah.
But because of the way the arts are in this country, and especially at this time, we aren't contracted all year round. So we only are on our payroll like anywhere between like 30 and 40 weeks a year.
Wow.
So we go on planned layoffs.
Yeah.
So the reason why we're able to do these productions in a way is because it's enabling us to fill the gap.
Got it. Got
So
it.
we were on a 4 week layoff from work where we're not getting paid,
Yeah.
and where we aren't, I would say almost more importantly, we're not getting to do the work that we love to do.
Absolutely. Well, okay. I love that you mentioned Texas Ballet. You do ballet. Here in the recent years, there's been a few more documentaries, a few more conversations around ballet. That's the only reason that I have an idea about how difficult
Yeah.
and and how big of a commitment ballet takes. I know it's
Hmm.
not an easy thing. People watch it and they're like, "Oh, it's cute," but you know it is like you got to be physically like tough, mentally tough. There's so many things that you have to have in order to be able to perform ballet at the highest level. So, on your journey to becoming a ballet, a professional dancer, tell me what it's like because in this world, like no matter what you do, whatever area you choose, failure is going to show up, okay?
Hmm.
And challenges. And when they do, a lot of people quit. For
Hmm.
instance, let's say an artist, a kid's painting, and you're the best artist, you're the best artist, but the day they get their first critique
Hmm.
in middle school, then they quit and they say they can't take it.
Hmm.
What are some of the challenges that you had to face as you're progressing in your
Yeah.
ballet?
Um, there are so many things that come up along that journey. Rejection is certainly one of them.
Mm,
I think that's one of the ways that a ballet career, like ballet training, can really be a benefit, especially to young people,
yeah.
is that you learn from a young age that you're not going to get into everything. I mean, we would go to these, we would go to Youth American Grand Prix, which is a pretty big national competition, and all of my teachers at Maryland Youth Ballet were fantastic, and like we're not going, don't even think about you're going to compete, you're going to perform and do something that you
Got it.
love.
Yeah.
So having that perspective taught to me when I was younger really helped me navigate, like you get rejection after
Hmm.
rejection for like summer programs, like you're trying to get scholarships, things like
Yeah.
that. So that's one of like the good sources of growth from failure, but there were definitely a lot of not as nice ones.
So, okay, there's a lot of rejection, obviously. It's a
Hmm.
numbers game. So
Yeah.
you try out, or however you say it, for a lot of recitals or things. How do you deal with rejection? Because for a lot of people, that's the period in their walk, and they say, "Nope, I failed. I got rejected. and that equals failure, and I can't continue forward because it does something to you because everyone around you, your friends and parents are saying, "You're amazing, you're amazing, you're amazing."
Hmm.
But then all of a sudden, somebody doesn't think you're amazing.
Hmm.
How do you how do you proceed the next day, right? How do
Yeah.
you deal with it mentally?
Yeah. Um, I mean, there's definitely some rejections that are harder than others for
Yeah,
sure. So sometimes it looks, sometimes the timeline's a little bit different, but I think the best thing and the best lessons that I learned about dealing with it is just, especially in an artistic field, is to understand that it's completely subjective. And I mean, I think especially now, like, people's experiences are gonna affect them in all sorts of different ways to make them look at you like, someone might not like your name or might not like your hair or might have a previous experience that,
yeah,
makes them look at you in one filter or another. And you have no control over that at
that's true.
all. So obviously it still stings though. Does that really help with the sting of rejection? So some days, sometimes, you think of that and you're like, oh yeah, I'm over it in like a
Yeah.
minute. And sometimes it takes a little bit longer. But, the best thing you can do is just get back on the horse.
Well, boy, that horse be bucking you off a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a pretty. And so
Yeah.
what I'm and okay, and the lesson to me is like it's one thing to get bucked off,
Mhm.
but when you're choosing this path,
Mhm.
and this is lifetime, this is passion.
Mhm.
Like you're not only choosing to get bucked off, but you're saying, "Hey, I'm gonna get used to being on the ground and getting back up."
Yeah.
So mentally, what are some strengths that maybe you developed after? Is 10 a big number or is it a
Mm.
small number as far as rejections? Have you had more than
Oh, no, that's a small
a
number.
small number? So, okay,
Yeah.
walk me through like what it felt like after the 10th and then jump up a little bit more. Can you see the growth that you've gained?
Oh,
Like the
100%.
way you take rejection now compared to maybe 10, 5 years
Yeah.
ago?
I
What are
would
some
not
differences?
I would not have a choreographic work being performed at the Modern Museum if I hadn't gone through that many rejections.
Got it.
Yeah, that's how you get there. I heard such a great quote about creativity doesn't come from having, people think like I need to have everything ready to go. Like I need to, if you're going to be a painter or something, I need to
Yeah.
have the paint, I need to have this, I need to have that. And they think that's going to give them creativity. Like
Mm.
you need all the tools, right?
Yeah, I
But the
agree.
opposite is really true. Creativity is born from not having everything you need. Like if you don't
Mm.
have the paint, you have to get creative. And that's
Yeah.
when, totally new art comes about because you didn't have the traditional, oh, this is what you need. And I think the same is true in any creative field, and honestly in any field at all. Like the fact that I was getting rejected from being able to perform choreography, or finding opportunities,
Yeah.
especially for female choreographers. It forced me to get creative,
Yeah.
and that's how I found these kind of unique connections. Like people aren't doing that I'm the only person really doing choreographic works at the Modern right now, and it's
Yeah.
because we came up with this kind of new thing because I was like, well,
Very nice.
yeah, so
Okay, so you said as a woman
yeah,
that there's some limitations,
yeah,
and I have to, as a father to a young girl, if I hear that and I hear of a woman opening new doors with confidence and boldness, I gotta examine it a little bit for all these young ladies who are listening now that want to be dancers or want to do other things. They're going to come across some pretty big hurdles as far as what the normal is. How can you, or where did you find this confidence to say, this is who I am, and you're going to tell me no, and no female has ever done it, but I'm going to keep on knocking until that door gets
yeah,
opened?
yeah,
Where did you get that from? Because and the reason I mention it is because that's such a barrier
hmm,
for so many things to get done,
yeah.
and that's unique.
Mhm.
What gave you that confidence? Where'd you gain it?
I'm really lucky that I come from a very strong female family, or
Yeah.
like very strong females in my family. My paternal grandmother, her name was Esther Farber. She's my dad's mom, who is no longer with us. So I do miss her a lot. But I'm also Jewish. I can't remember if I mentioned that yet
Yeah,
on the
but
air. But she was a founder of an organization called JOFA, which stands for Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance.
got it.
So she was a really, really powerful female in her community, and
So you got to see that and experience
yeah,
it.
yeah, and like the thing is though, it's like my experience with her, it wasn't like I ever had this thought of like, oh, she's a feminist or oh, she's doing these things for women. It was just the way she was. Like, it was just part of who
Yeah.
she was. And I feel that way too. Like, I don't feel like I'm necessarily a feminist. I'm more of like a humanist. Like, I just want to see everybody have
I love it.
opportunities.
Well, that's how I feel about my daughter. So when she saw you, when she saw everyone dancing, and then I told when we met you, and then you told her you were the one who put it together, she kind of lit up.
Oh,
You
that
know, and
makes
I
me so
couldn't I
happy.
couldn't read her mind, but I know what she was because I just know her so well. She was thinking that means I can.
Yeah.
And then that day she goes, Dad, I want to get back in dance. And I'm like, all right, baby, you got it. You can get back in dance. But by me taking her and you doing that and breaking down some of those barriers, you offered her a view of what's possible.
I'm like honored.
Yeah, yeah. And so
That's so powerful.
and so that's why to me I love to expose her to a lot of things.
Yeah.
And so as you start dancing, you got it's a physical sport, right? I
Right.
mean, I know it's art and everything, but you got to there's injuries, there's setbacks, there's things that you don't know or it takes you a long time to learn to be able to do. Okay? So talk to me about some of the times where you just kind of fell to your knees and you're sweating and maybe crying and saying, "Why am I doing this? I need it isn't
Yeah.
working for me." You know what I mean? One of those challenges.
I think one of the biggest physical challenges I have, I mean, some of my friends look at me and they're like, "Oh, what do you mean you're turned out you have all this facility?" Facility is sort of like the way that we describe like the body you're born into and like how much, because ballet in particular is very unnatural to the human body. Like you have to turn your feet out, so and like do all these other things that are not a natural thing, like pointing
Yeah.
the toes, being able to stand on your toes, like all sorts of things that with training it gets
Absolutely.
better. But some people have, physical limitations. It's pretty natural. Like, you can stretch all you want and like get more flexible, but at the end of the day, your body has a limit a lot of the time. So one of the things I struggle with is, my hip bones. I have this thing called cam morphology, and it basically is it means that there's like overgrowth of bone in my hip socket. We don't have to get into the
Yeah,
logistics of it, but
Not good for a dancer.
yeah, not fantastic when
Yeah.
you're trying to do ballet.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, a lot of ballet is so rooted in its history and not rooted in science that it doesn't really benefit the athletic side of it. Like, if we had a better understanding of the human body from the people who are teaching us and from the people who are in charge, like, it
Yeah.
might be easier for those of us who have, like, physical limitations.
Yeah.
But, in the end, it kind of falls down on the dancer to like learn about your body and learn how you're going to get over those limitations. But the cam morphology in my hips was something that has affected me my whole career and still affects me all the time. It started when I was like a teenager. It usually comes up when your like growth plates are forming and things
Yeah.
like that, and you're like finishing growing. And I remember there was a point in time where I couldn't sit down because it hurt so badly.
It seems important for a ballet dancer to be able to sit down Indian style.
Yeah, I mean, like, or like
the
I couldn't sit
minimum.
cross-legged at all.
Yeah.
And like it just hurt. And I remember being like, okay, I wanted it so badly to be a dancer, and I was like, how is this gonna work out? Like,
Yeah.
I can't even sit down.
Wow.
Luckily, as I started growing, or like as I stopped getting taller,
Yeah.
it kind of slowed down and I was able to dance again. But like being so young and like trying to figure out your own physiology is very confusing. Like,
Yeah.
and doctors are trying to explain to me, like we went to a chiropractor and like it was a whole thing. And then luckily it was been on and off. Like I just couldn't understand why I wasn't as turned out as some of my peers because I didn't quite understand the hip thing.
Yeah.
A couple years back though, it started to become a pretty major issue in my professional career as far as injuries go. I was having a lot of pain. And you can only push through so much. And
Yeah.
I mean, dancers can push through a lot, but like it was getting to the point where I was like, well, if I keep doing this and it keeps hurting, like I'm going to end my career early because I'm not going to, you have to
Yeah.
take care of your body if you want to have a long professional career. So at that point, I ended up doing more work with doctors, and I really started to learn about what the cam morphology was and what it was doing inside my hips. I had a lot of MRIs. It turns out I have labral tears in my hips, which
Oh
is
man.
not great. A lot of times people need surgery to repair that. But the silver lining was that the way that this cam morphology, this extra bony bit works, it's limiting, and that's always been like a negative thing to me. But because it's so limiting, I don't require the surgery. So in the end, it kind of saved the day because it's
Yeah.
like, well, you're so limited that it's not going to get worse at this point.
So now you know
Yeah,
what it is that you're dealing with,
right.
and you've accepted it, and now it's time to work around it, to get
Yeah.
everything around it strong. And the reason I love that little story or your reality, is that people in their journey, they'll say, well, okay, I want to do this in business, but I'm not real good in this area. And you work around it. You
Yeah,
figure out a way to make everything else around stronger if it is part of your journey. If you're
right.
like, I do want to reach my goal. And in order to do that, I have two choices right now. My hip, whatever's going on there is going to stop me, or my passion and what I want to do in dance is going to drive me. And that started taking effect in your life.
Yeah.
So how do you tell yourself keep going after
Yeah.
something like that?
I think it's just the desire to do to be a part of whatever it is you want to be a part of, whether that's
Yeah.
dance or whether that's something else.
Yeah.
And like I think also just you said the word accepting. Like I think that's the big thing there is like you need to accept it, and like learning that it was gonna, the thing that always seemed to get in my way was gonna prevent me from needing a surgery. I was finally like, okay, like this is something that's part of me, but and most of the time it seemed like it was negative, but I'm like there's actually a positive here.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so now you're dancing and you got a lot of years behind you. Tell me about some of the like injuries that dancers go through, some of the injuries that you've had. What's recovery time look for a dancer that hurts their ankle or something?
Yeah.
And then how do you deal with that? And the reason I mention it is because sometimes we have setbacks and we don't know like what the time limit is.
Right.
If I make a mistake or if I have a fail, the point is you don't want to be stuck in it. Sometimes it's debilitating. I get it, but there still has to be something positive that comes out of it. What's an injury that you had, and you remember how you got it, and then how you came out of it?
yeah, I've been really, really fortunate that I have not had a major injury, knock
Yeah.
on wood.
There we go.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. No, appreciate that. That I haven't had anything that's taken me completely out for a long period of time.
Yeah.
I have had several different things. I've had anterior tibialis tendonitis in both of my feet at different times. I had a case of acute Achilles tendonitis. And even though they didn't take me out, there was definitely a period of like, it's just very stressful. Like you're trying to prepare for roles, you're trying to do this thing that you love, and it's like having a baby. I mean, I'm not a mom yet, but I'm assuming it's like having a child. Like
Yeah.
you have to take care of your foot like it's almost a separate entity from yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like
So much is riding on it,
yeah. And so like, as every moment in rehearsal you're thinking about it. After rehearsal you're taking care of it. You have to ice it 4 times a day. You have to do all this. You have to take this medicine then. You have to do these exercises. You have
Yeah.
to. So it becomes like this other thing. I mean, I see a lot of my peers go through injuries and the results are always kind of different. But I feel like, regardless of what the end result is, it doesn't end up being a failure. It's just something they, or, even if we considered it a failure, like it's something they go through and they
Yeah.
come out stronger from it. Like, sometimes, you're out for 2 or 3 weeks, but other times you miss a bunch of shows. You can be out for up to 6 months if you need to
Wow.
have a surgery or something. So
Tell
yeah.
tell me, okay, so there's
Yeah.
qualities that you need for certain things.
Hmm.
That for dance, I need this quality. For to be a DJ, I need this quality, and
Hmm.
so on. What are some qualities that you've gained by being a dancer and going through all the rejections and challenges and everything that you've faced that kind of translate to other areas in life?
Oh
That
yeah.
whenever someone asks you, like for advice,
Hmm. There's
yeah,
there's so many different things. Like I think, as dancers, we expect to leave our dancing career behind anywhere from ages like 35 to 40. So you
mhm,
retire, in quotes, but you don't actually, you're not retiring from the workforce.
yeah,
Like not in this economy.
yeah,
I mean, and like I think most of us would want to be done working at that point anyway. So I think dancers go on to other careers in the most powerful ways because we learn so many things. Like
yeah,
obviously the grit and the tenacity of like having to deal with
mm,
rejections, like having to deal with rejections from our own bodies every day in a sense.
mhm,
Like, having to deal with my hip stuff, like, every day I'm in ballet class and I try and go and do something and
wow,
then it doesn't work out the way I want it to because I'm like,
yeah,
well, my body's not really like it's hard for me to get it to do those things just the way
yep,
it's built. But so I think just that being able to get back on it constantly, no
mhm,
matter what's thrown at us, is something super super powerful. I think, and I notice this especially from my peers, my close friends around me now. I just have a lot of really emotionally intelligent people, and I think it's because our careers as dancers, it's so much about communication.
mm.
I notice this.
Although it's super, like when you are
Mhm.
dancing, absolute quiet.
Yeah, it's
So
it's such
so
a fun
tell me, you just said there's a
like
lot of communicating.
contrast. Yeah. So when I work as a choreographer, the goal of a choreographer, I have my vision for what the piece I want it to look like, and I
Yeah,
have, steps in mind. Sometimes, we can come up with like, I may have a slight idea, and between myself and the dancers, we come up with something. But if I want it to look the way I want it to look,
yeah,
I have to figure out how I can translate what's in my head
mm,
to the dancers.
yeah,
They can't read my mind. And as a dancer, I've worked with choreographers before, and I feel the most effective ones and the works that end up being the most powerful come from artists who can communicate that and understand
mm.
how to work with their dancers. So it
That's
is
interesting.
really an interesting like paradox how like the work itself, for the most part, is silent. There are some pieces where we speak, or there's other
Yeah,
vocalizations and stuff like that.
I
But
feel like we we have successes
hmm.
and you get there quietly, right? But
Hmm.
the failures in life and the challenges seem to be so loud
Right,
to
yeah,
try to kind of take you down.
yeah.
Communicating, like, and obviously you're communicating to the dancers,
Hmm.
choreographing what you want to, what your vision is.
Hmm.
Is there a communication that you do with yourself as far as from your mind to your heart that says, you know what, you can?
Hmm.
Even when everything's saying, you can't. Like
Yeah.
you still got to get up. You still got to lace up your. What do you call the shoes that y'all wearing?
Point shoes.
You
Like
still got.
yeah.
Yeah, you got
I
to
mean,
lace up your
Inside
point
Voices was
shoes.
barefoot, so.
Yeah, and
But,
your point shoes.
yeah.
You got to put on your boots. As another term
Yeah,
goes.
yeah.
How do you communicate to yourself? Like, what do you?
Yeah.
What's your inner voice
Yeah.
sound like?
That's actually such a good thing to bring up, and it's something that I'm still learning how to
Yeah.
do. I think coming from the dance world where perfectionism is such a huge part of at least the training when I was younger, which is unfortunate. Like we're coming into this
Mm.
world. I also have a bachelor's degree in psychology, so a lot of this. A lot of the inner psychological stuff is super important to me and something that I've, had to struggle with. And
Yeah.
I think everybody does, dancer or not dancer, everyone has that. But coming from that world of perfectionism from such a young age, it took a really long time to
Wow.
have a kind inner dialogue
Yeah.
because, like you were saying, like, it needs to come to the point where you know, even if everyone else is telling you no, you need to tell yourself yes.
Yeah.
When I was younger, everyone else was telling me no, or maybe everybody else was telling me okay, like maybe, and I was telling myself no. Like I was often the hardest critic. I mean, most of
Yeah.
us are, especially when we're younger. But like I would have so many tearful days in the studio just because I was like, I'm not enough, I'm not doing this. And it's you know, took years of therapy to learn about myself and like learn the ways I work and
Yeah.
learn how to be nice to myself. And I think that's where you're going to find the most success and the most authenticity in your own work, no matter what it is, but especially as a creative.
You know, you say the word perfection, and quite frankly, you know, it opens up the door for failure because first of all, it's obvious, but perfection, you're just not going to reach it, and but because it's expected, it messes with your head.
Yeah.
So I can imagine how many dancers were growing up and then did everything right, but they could never hit that perfection. Or someone was telling them, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. When in reality there is a point where it is good enough. You'll never reach perfect, but there is a point where you can go out, perform, and impact people. Tell me how you started breaking down that weight
Yeah.
of perfection, because now it's your career and you know you're never going to be perfect, and
Yeah.
that's the expectation. So how do you deal with that? And the reason I ask this is there's people who don't want to be what they desire because they can never be the top of that because it's so hard.
Yeah.
But the climb to me is so beautiful.
Yeah.
So tell me how you came to terms with saying per- expecting perfection, it hurts people
Yeah.
and limits them. And you
Yeah.
might be, killing someone's dream
Right.
if that's what you're putting on them. And yet here you are walking on this journey chasing your passion.
Yeah, I think that the thing that opened my eyes the most is the small successes here and there where I realized that the art form could impact somebody. And like you made the example earlier with your daughter, and that just makes me so happy to hear. And to me, from earlier on in my career, that became a really important goal. Like if I could inspire one person, that was the ultimate success. And then like learning how I could do that more and more. Part of what we did at the Modern was make sure that the admission was free, because so many people don't get to see dance.
No.
Because there's a paywall. Some people can't afford it. Some people think that it's not for them, and in my opinion, it's for everybody. So I think that idea of like getting to impact people became so strong. There was a time when I think we were performing Nutcracker, which is like the most done ballet in the entire world.
I know.
It's the cash cow of the ballet world. I get it. Like families love
It's
it,
great.
and that's
It's
fun.
great.
I mean, as a Jewish person, it's hilarious because like I'll be doing like opening night. It's like a Christmas tale, and it's like I'll go home and light Hanukkah candles. But anyway, we were doing a show of Nutcracker, and I was doing the lead role, the Sugar Plum Fairy. And I think I came away from it, and I thought I did like the worst job ever. And we were performing at Bass Performance Hall, right? So like a pretty big crowd of people, and I was just like, oh, that sucked. Like I'm so bad. I'm a terrible dancer. All the negative talk that like starts swirling up in your head.
Yeah.
And after this particular show, this was a while back. This is pre-COVID and everything. So we used to do this thing where after the show, sometimes me and my partner, the Sugar Plum and her Nutcracker Cavalier, the leads would go out into the front, and we would do some like photo ops with some of the kids who came and like sign things or whatever. And after this particular show of like, I just wanted to cry. I just hated everything I'd done in that show. And I went out to the front and I think it was this one little girl in particular, and like she was so impacted by what I had done, and she didn't care if like maybe my foot wasn't perfectly pointed, maybe my turns weren't perfectly on that day. Like to her, I had carried this magical thing, and just remembering how powerful you can be, even if you fail, even if you're not perfect or whatever it is. I think the other really important thing to remember is that perfectionism is kind of just procrastination in disguise. Saying you're not going to do something because you're not going to be able to do it perfectly.
Yeah.
That just means you don't have, you might not have the drive to do that thing, which is also fine.
Yeah,
Sometimes
yeah.
it drives you to the thing you're supposed to be doing. Because if you quit one thing, well, maybe another thing is really where you're supposed to be at. But I think for such a long time in the dance world, like perfectionism was lauded. Like it was like like you should be a perfectionist. You should always be trying to be perfect and everything. But it does, yeah, it really limits people.
If you could replace that term with something that would be more healthier, not only for kids coming into dance, but just for you as a dancer in the company that you work for, and what word would you replace it with?
I mean, I don't know about one word. Like I think
Like,
now
or at least a thought. Like,
the
what?
thought is definitely like do the best you can do for yourself today.
Yeah.
And that's not going to look like it did yesterday.
Yeah.
It might be better than yesterday. It might be worse than yesterday, but it's all part of the journey. And just
Yeah.
accepting that as part of the journey, and like instead of thinking of perfectionism, like maybe think about what lessons you can learn today. Like, oh, today I learned that, you know, maybe yesterday I had a really long day and today I'm feeling it, or,
Yeah.
you know, or I'm surprised by like this morning I had a really rough morning, but I performed excellently in class. Like I really like the way I performed. So sometimes you're surprised by yourself, and, you know, to have no expectations is kind of a good creative place to be, I think, too.
Yeah.
Because if you think, oh, I didn't sleep that well last night, oh, today's going to suck, like it's probably going to suck. You're setting yourself up psychologically
Yeah.
for it to suck. But if you say, okay, I didn't sleep that well, but now I'm here,
Yeah,
I'm
show
in this
up.
moment.
Yeah,
Yeah,
do
I'm
it.
moving on. And if it does suck, you can say, you know, like this makes sense to me. But if it doesn't, you can be like, hey, that was a pleasant surprise.
So sometimes in life, some of the challenges that we face come from stubbornness. Okay. Now, let me explain. As a dancer, and you being a professional dancer, there's a lot that you already know.
Right.
But every now and then, you still have to learn. You still have to allow people to instruct you. And I think that in the journey of succeeding and avoiding failure, we have to learn how to seek out instruction and find mentors or people who we look up to. How do you experience that now? Because when you're young, you're like, whoever wants to help me, because I don't know
Right.
nothing. But as you get better and at your level, you get a little more particular about who and how you're instructed. How do you go about taking instruction or constructive criticism?
In a way, as a professional ballet dancer, you kind of maintain that like youth of like getting feedback from anyone kind of forever, at least in
Good.
my opinion.
That's a good thing, though.
Yeah,
I didn't know it was
like a
going to go
student
that
of
way.
life.
I think it's important to always be a student. Now,
Yeah.
a lot of people seek help once they fail. And I'm
Right.
just like, come on. Like, why didn't you do that before?
Yeah.
Because you surround yourself with people that believe in you, that can teach you, people who've been in whatever field you're in,
Right.
and they can pour into you.
Right.
So, how do you look at people that instruct you, and how do you instruct people in a way to build them up?
Yeah. I mean, as a ballet dancer, like we have a number of artistic professionals who, you know, run the company, our ballet masters who teach classes and do rehearsals, and our artistic director, Ben, who's fantastic, and we love him. And they, you know, all have these years and years of experience. And we work with them every day. So we're constantly getting corrections from them and doing things. And I think so it's just built into the dancer life. I think as you get older, for me, especially recently, like you learn how to bring it into 2022, if that makes sense. The thing about the dance world is, you know, and not to be ageist or anything, but, you know, the generation who's teaching the younger generation is from a totally different dance world. I mean, dancers in the 90s, for instance, were expected to be toothpick thin. Like I would be considered fat
Yeah.
in the 90s for a ballet dancer,
Yeah.
which is just crazy because I'm a pretty lean gal. Like it's just nuts to think about. You know, luckily ballet's kind of caught on to a little bit of the science and realized like, okay, you need to eat in order to have muscles in order to perform these difficult repertoire. Like, so yeah.
I was watching just recently. There was a documentary about Tony Hawk. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen the documentary.
Okay,
no,
good,
but
good.
Tony Hawk seems pretty badass. It's
So
pretty fun.
so ballet and skateboarding, from my perspective, have a lot in common. Okay, in the sense that they're learning tricks that aren't natural,
Right. Yeah.
that are very difficult, and
Yeah.
that they fail at, for some people, hundreds of times.
Oh yeah.
Before they get it.
Yeah.
And then when someone gets it, it's one guy that gets it first. And then after that, everyone else starts being able to do it.
Yeah.
So in the documentary, Tony Hawk is trying to learn the 900. Jumps off the ramp, spins and lands, and he fails time after time after time, and it's dreadful to watch.
Yeah. Well, especially because like when they fail, they like
And
biff
he's
it like that.
sliding,
Ow.
and they zoom in, and there's just this. He's frustrated, he's
Yeah.
defeated, he's sweating, and then there's instances where he stands up and he just screams, and he's
Yeah.
just like, he's like, throws his skateboard. I mean, over and over and over. So then he shows up to this one tournament, and everyone's cheering him on, and he does it. He did it like 3 or 4
Oh my
times.
gosh.
And at the very end, all his skaters came around him and they put their hands on him. They're like, "You got it. We're with you. We're with you." And he did it. Like, I'm getting goosebumps because it really is a
I
very
want to
impactful.
watch this documentary now.
You have to, and then he went, and then he did it. He did the 900, and he landed. First one ever to do it. History in the making, and he landed it.
Crazy.
Not that it had to do with his skater guys, but the energy in that environment was so strong that it did something.
Yeah.
What's something like a 900 for you? A move, a stance that you had to learn that cost you a lot,
Oh my gosh.
to the point where you cried,
Oh,
to
yeah.
the point that you were frustrated, and people were encouraged you, and you finally got it. Tell me about something. Is there something like that exists in your life?
There definitely is in the last couple of years of my career. So we did this work. It's by a choreographer named, excuse me, named William Forsythe. He is a fantastic choreographer, and I think it was in the 80s or 90s. He choreographed this work called In the Middle, Somewhat Elevated. It's like a very famous contemporary ballet work. It was originally set on Paris Opera Ballet. And it's been performed all over the world. And
What was it called? In the middle?
In the Middle, Somewhat Elevated. There's a comma in there after in the middle also. And I, from a young age, like when I was in high school, I was obsessed with the work. I would look it up on YouTube like all the time and watch it. And then a couple of years ago, I learned that we were going to get to do it in the company. And I was like, oh, I just want to be a part of this piece so bad. I don't even care if I do the smallest role. Like I want to do it so bad. But of course in my head, I was like, I want to do the lead role. Like this is an iconic ballet. I want to do the lead spot.
Yeah.
I got really, really lucky, and I ended up getting cast in the lead role, and I was so excited. I love so much of that dance, but there's this part in the solo. There's just this one turn. That's a turn that I struggle with all the time, and you had to do it in this solo.
Yeah.
And I cried so much over it. Like every day after rehearsal, I was just so upset. And it was like silly looking back because I'm just like, ugh, like, but I was just so passionate about like doing this well. And I remember the first night that I performed the role, maybe I got it kind of okay once or twice in rehearsal.
Yeah.
But I was like, I'm just going to have to do it the best I can do it. And that's going to be that. The first night we performed it was our company's gala. So it was like a really big show. All of our subscribers were there. It felt like the pressure was super on.
Yeah.
And I get to the solo and I just completely let go. And I'm in the middle of the solo and I get to that turn and I just nailed it. It was like the best time I'd ever done it. And I got done with the solo, and I just remember like looking out to the front of house, and everybody started clapping. And it's kind of not a moment where like people traditionally clapped, but I was just so like I think that they could probably sense my energy of like I'm just so proud of myself. Like I went through so much, and like to get to that one point and just be able to say, you know what? F it, like I'm just gonna go all out and do this as best as I can, and then to really trusting myself ended up being the key there. Like I just went for it and it worked out, and that was just one of the most exhilarating performances I think I've ever had, and super proud moment.
What are some qualities that dance has taught you that you'll carry on for the rest of your life?
So many. I think I'll always, even when I stop dancing, even when my stage career ends, I'll always be a dancer. So much about connecting to your fellow dancers, especially as a female dancer in the ballet world. In so many of the classic pieces like Swan Lake, Giselle, like, you could name hundreds of ballets. And even in the more contemporary ones, there's a lot of ensemble work, right? You could see that even in Inside Voices, like a much more contemporary work. There's stuff where people are dancing all together, and the women are so used to doing this. We call it like a corps de ballet sense, like the ensemble. To be in a perfect line together, to move at exactly the same time, you have to have this sense of the dancers around you,
Yeah.
and it gives you this connection and like this ability to sense what other people are doing. I think it goes, at least for some of us, and maybe this is just like a woo-wee belief on my part, but like it goes beyond a physical understanding of people around you, and it becomes
Well,
like a psychological understanding of like how people are working. And
there's, I don't know what it's called, but there was a
mm-hmm.
study on animals, and they were looking at herds, and they were looking at bees, birds,
Mm-hmm.
wildebeest, and they move like even though there's 10,000 of them,
Right.
if something clicks on the right, they all move.
Right. It's like a hive mind kind of a
Yeah,
thing.
but it just happens naturally. It's
Yeah.
like it's a cool thing. So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool that you
Yeah.
you point
Like
that out.
learning how to work with other people is one of the most valuable things. And you really just get connected to people on a deeper level.
Yeah.
That's been cool, and I hope is something that I hold on to forever.
When you did that turn,
Yeah.
it's kind of like a win. It's kind of like a victory that happened for
Yeah,
you.
for sure.
But it's in the middle of a dance.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily the end.
Right.
So and the reason I like it is because whenever we fail, we feel like it's the end.
Uh-huh.
I failed, boom, it's over. Turn off the light, show's over.
Yeah.
That's what we feel like.
Yeah.
But people don't realize that whenever you win or come out of those challenges and start doing better, those victories come in the middle of living.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're not meant to be a stopping point.
Right.
They're meant to be a growing point or a step to the next thing. And so I love that you did it, but then you had to move on to the next step.
Right, yeah.
And continue to go.
And there were still moments in that show that I'm like, oh, that could have been better. That could have been better. Like, that's the funny thing is, like, I had this huge, like, moment in my career for me, like, this huge overcoming of this challenge. But at the same time, like, you're always on that grind. Like, you kind of always are.
Now, watching a beautiful performance, it's emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it can make you feel a certain way. It can, stir up things. But that's from our perspective, sitting on the chairs, watching, and you're up there and you're in it. How do y'all experience it?
Yeah.
Like, because you're trading two different things. It's one thing to be on stage, and it's one thing to watch it.
Yeah.
What are some of the beautiful things that a dancer, while you're doing it, experience?
That is, it's I would say it's just as emotional, if not maybe more. I mean, it depends on the audience member, and I guess on the dancer too. But for me, it's like a spiritual experience a lot of the times. Especially with, I try and treat all roles equally, but I think all roles don't necessarily treat you equally. Some of them are just more powerful, or, you have like a really, really emotional connection to certain things.
Yeah.
There's a work called Voluntaries that was choreographed by a guy named Glenn Tetley, who's no longer alive. He was a big choreographer in like the late 20th century.
Oh, okay.
But it's a work, and it surrounds the ideas of death and mourning. He created it when John Cranko, who was a huge choreographer and director in the ballet world, passed away. It was sort of like a eulogy to him almost. And like every piece you get to sort of, as an artist at least, or at least I do, find what speaks to you in the work. And there were so many moments of vulnerability in that piece. I feel like I performed the principal pas de deux in that, like in the middle of my, on the younger side of my career. Like I was kind of coming up in the company. And it just gives you this opportunity to explore the depth of yourself as an artist, and like in a very vulnerable situation. Like I was standing in the middle of the floor at like Bass Performance Hall, and everyone's looking at you, and you're going into this solo, but it's like you realize you have this opportunity to express yourself in a way that you can't with words.
So I grew up and I struggled like with reading and writing in school.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but here I am doing this podcast, and I'm communicating, and I love like helping people tell their story.
Yeah.
I love what we're doing here.
Yeah.
So someone will hear this. This is my performance, by the way. So I'm kind of comparing it to you. So I'm
Yeah,
on
no,
stage right now,
totally.
and it's very easy to take and listen in your car and be like, "Man, it's pretty cool." Sam's pretty good, and she was amazing and everything. But while I'm doing this,
Mm-hmm.
in my soul,
Yeah.
there's these memories of me feeling dumb when I was a kid, feeling worthless,
Yeah.
right? But then I'm also recalling growing and learning
It's so beautiful.
and becoming, right? Because I can't experience it from the stranger that's listening to it in the car.
Yeah.
So whenever I'm performing, I am like looking at
Yeah.
my younger self and saying, I have come from there to here. And that's how I clock in when I do it. And so every
Yeah.
interview is that. It is a performance in a sense for me. And that's how I experience it. But I don't no one will experience it like that.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
just for me.
Yeah.
But the show has a context, right? And that's why I
Mm-hmm.
was asking you that question
Yeah.
because how often do you see your younger self dancing? How
All the
often?
time now.
Yeah.
All the time now, and I really, even more so when I choreograph,
Mm,
I see my younger self for
yeah.
sure.
When you're choreographing
Yeah.
and you're having to deal with other
Mm-hmm.
dancers that dance alongside you in other area and when you're at the Fort Worth Ballet, how do you lead them to become better? When
Yeah.
when we're trying to do away with the word perfection, right?
Right. Yeah.
How do you deal with them so you get the best out of them, but
Yeah.
without expecting perfection?
It really is such an interesting transition to go from being like you know, in the room to what we call like at the front of the room when you're
Yeah,
choreographing and you're the leader. You're responsible for being organized, being ready to
mm,
go, knowing what you're going to do that day. But then you're also responsible for the communication to your dancers and so many of the negative aspects of dance come from that poor communication
yeah,
or saying things in a way that can be really really damaging. So it feels like a huge responsibility in a lot of
yeah,
ways, and I really sincerely hope that all choreographers would think about it a lot because I'm like sometimes I'm like, why would someone say this to me, the way they did or whatever,
yeah,
because it can be really harmful. The number one thing I try and do is say things as much as possible, not in a not to say that you have to be positive all the time. That's not what I'm saying, but like not in a negative form. So instead of saying, don't do this, say, do this.
hmm,
And that's not only just to be like positive. Like I hate forced positivity. I don't think you have to be positive all the time or happy all the time or
I
like,
agree.
but I think
That
from
makes you crazy, by the way.
right, and it's just fake.
It's
Like it's just
fake.
not authentic.
I'm
Like
with
if
you.
something's wrong, I'm gonna say it, but it doesn't make sense to say what you don't want them to do because from a cycle, and this is where my psychology degree really comes in clutch.
Yeah.
From a psychological perspective, if you tell someone what not to do, your
Mm,
brain has a really hard time understanding what that means at a basic level. Like how do you think about not an apple?
yeah.
It's impossible, like your brain doesn't know how to not like unless you're thinking about something else, right? So what that boils down to in like the choreographic world is if you tell someone like, oh, you're doing it, don't do it this way, your brain is patterning that thing. Like your brain doesn't hear the don't do it. Your brain just hears like sickle my foot. So then of
Yeah.
course people are going to keep sickling their foot because their brain's saying, she said something about sickling her foot. And like that's obviously boiling. It's a lot more complicated than that. But like trying to be like, okay, let's do this more like this. And trying to recognize that if a dancer isn't doing it the way I see it, that's on me as a choreographer. That means that I didn't communicate it
Yeah.
in a way that made sense to them.
Hmm.
So trying to find like what makes sense for each dancer and also understanding like we don't know, like of course the best thing is to come, walk in the studio, leave everything at the door, right? Or that's at least what we've always been
Yeah.
taught. But at the same time that becomes a little inhuman at too high of a level. It's like
Hmm.
people are who they are no matter what door they're walking in. Like
Yeah.
yeah, if you're having a rough day like and you can't perform, like maybe don't come in that day.
Yeah.
Or at least tell the person in charge like, hey, like I'm just having a hard time today, whatever.
Yeah.
But like I think taking into consideration that everyone's people, like no matter how perfect and like perfectionistic, whatever you get.
Yeah.
Everyone's people. Like, we have hard days, we have good days, we have days where we're going to be distracted, we have days where we're going to be really focused, but maybe on the wrong things. Like,
Yeah.
so it's like trying to learn how to work with human beings and not just saying they're dancers, they should be perfect all the time and they should 100% be able to read my mind, know what I mean. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, no, that's on me to make sure they understand me.
So after your performance at the Modern, okay, so in our challenges in life, there's a point where things just kind of start working your way. And then the universe kind of gives you a pat on the back. Okay. And it's a beautiful thing. And sometimes that's the fuel someone needs to go and be great. Or for, maybe they were on the verge of quitting and then they, get a pat on the back and then they continue going. How, I'm thinking about your life growing up, challenges, learning, perfection's unobtainable, and I need to keep going, and my hip, and all these challenges. And then that day, you choreograph the inside voices, and then at the end, they bow, and then you come out. And when you come out, we all gave you an applause. Mm-hmm. Now, it all seems very routine, because that's just the way the game goes. But I feel like we all experience these applauses. For some, it's like you, and you can see it in as people, but we need it in life. Mm-hmm. We need these applauses from our community. How did you feel standing there and they gave you an applause? Like, what did it do for you?
Yeah.
And I say it because it's a beautiful thing for a dancer, for you.
Yeah.
And for many people, that's what we're striving for. We just want an applause.
My therapist and I talk about it all the time. It's like, I feel like back in the day, I had some like not so healthy relationships where I was kind of taught, or, where it was expressed to me over and over again that looking for affirmation was like a bad thing. Like, why do you need, if you're confident, you don't need affirmation. But that's 100% incorrect. Everybody needs affirmation. It's a human thing.
Yeah.
So of course, when like, we all the dancers bow and then they bring me out as the choreographer and I get to bow, like, it's a pretty powerful moment. And I'm excited to be there and be bowing and, for the audience to appreciate the work we just did. I've got to be honest though, in those moments, like the real applause moment comes for me earlier on when I see the work for the first time, like in rehearsal when we really have everything together for the first time. That's kind of it for me. It's just to see that I succeeded in getting the dancers to all work together and put this thing together that started as just an idea in my head in my living room, or me just trying out a couple moves on my own. And when I'm up there getting the applause from the audience, like, I'm just proud of my dancers. Like, I take my bow, but then I'm like, really, it's these guys, at least as a choreographer. But there are lots of moments, like, as a dancer too, where you go out to take your bow and, I mean, it is a pretty powerful moment, where you're like, I did that.
If you're listening right now and you didn't quit when that failure hit you in the face, I wish I had an applause button. I don't, but I just want to give them. I wish they had applause. The affirmation.
Yeah.
Because it is a big deal not to quit.
Yeah.
When failure happens.
Yeah.
And okay, so final thoughts. Okay, when you hear the word failure, or if someone's going through a challenge right now, what words from a dancer that's been through everything that you've been through, what words of encouragement will you give to someone so that they just don't quit and become stronger?
Yeah. I think something that's not emphasized enough is let yourself be vulnerable. Like, if you're feeling like you're failing, remember that it's okay to feel like a failure sometimes. Like, it's 100% normal, and you will come out of it on the other side.
Well, I just want to say thank you for coming on the
Thank
Failed
you.
Podcast. It was such a great talk.
Yeah,
And
I enjoyed this.
And guys, if you're listening, I hope that this inspired you. I hope this made you change your mind about quitting or being too hard on yourself. Just keep on going. And you know what I say, man? I always laugh when I say it, but if one of my episodes sucks and it's not good, I don't care because I'm going to clock in again and I'll see you on the next one.